Back to Sosnick. Short-handed breakaway by Dave Cooler. He's gone right on in. Shoot! Go!
FLYSportsNetwork.com presents the O&B Puckcast, episode number 40. As the Flyers have won 8 in a row, I'm your host, Isaiah. I'm here with my partner, Chef B. How are you, man?
Very happy to be talking about good hockey for a change.
Absolutely. Dan, the Flyer fan, is also with us.
That's right. I am here.
Yes, and you're excited. And this is the busiest podcaster locally that I've ever heard of. And we have a special guest. Don't worry, you'll get your promotion opportunity. And we have a special guest returning from the fourthperiod.com, Anthony DiMarco. Welcome to the O&B again.
Thank you so much, guys. It's always a pleasure.
It's great to have Anthony with us. We're in the trade season. It's hot stove time. And there's a lot going on, but we have to talk about the Philadelphia Flyers, who've won 8 in a row. And since our last regular show, they've won 7 in a row, beating Boston, Montreal, beating Winnipeg, the Rangers behind Stoley's 1-0 shutout, the Bruins and Edmonton over a weekend in overtime of both games. And recently, last night, 2-1. With Carter Hart making 41 saves. And Dan, let me go to you first. What are your impressions about what's going on and where do the Flyers go from here as a team and maybe from the vantage point of the front office?
You know, I think the best word right now is resiliency. This team is certainly showing a lot of fight. You know, they're not playing the best hockey, but, you know, Carter Hart has really kept them in it. They're really playing well, and they have thrown themselves back into the playoff hunt. They're, 5 points out now as compared to 14 just 2 weeks ago. So they've made up some ground, and hopefully they can keep pushing just a little longer to maybe make a real serious run.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's review that. You know, Flyers have played 53 games. They are 24, 23, and 6. They still have that nasty differential of minus 24, but they are 5 points out of a playoff spot. And unlike most years, it looks like if they got 92 or 93 points, it's possible they could sneak into a wild card spot. It's still dicey right now, but obviously when you win 8 in a row, there's a lot to be excited. Of course, Chef, we know why the Flyers primarily have won 8 in a row. We know we're getting better performances from Nolan Patrick, Travis Konechny. Oscar Lindblom has been given more time and more responsibility playing on the second line, if you want to call it that, with ice time and penalty kill. But the star of the show was Carter Hart. You were right, my friend. So take a victory lap for us.
Well, I'll pat myself on the back for that. Listen, we had talked at length, and especially me and you with text back and forth about whether it was right to keep him up or send him down, keep him up, send him down. In the end, the argument it wasn't our argument to be made. He made the argument for himself by his play. I think it's funny that we had talked about how whether he was going to see better quality with the team up here because, or was he going to get thrown to the woods? In this case, I think it was the opposite. I think he made a couple of key saves early on when he came up here and showed that he was somebody that they could look at back there and go, he's going to bail us out. He's going to bail us out of something, whereas before in the past we had said numerous times on this show that that dreaded letdown goal, and he doesn't seem to have a dreaded letdown goal. So far anyway. I mean, yeah, he's still young, he's and all that, but based on your interview the other night, he's developed good habits. He seems to be sticking to them, and there's nothing but the sky's the limit for this kid.
Yeah. And Anthony, it's so great to have you on because you provide the national perspective. You're out near Montreal, and it's interesting. A local podcaster, Anthony Sanfilippo, made a good comment when he said, when we had Carter Hart, we brought him up, we weren't sure if he was going to be Jim Carrey, not the comedian. We're talking about the goaltender, that flash in the pan from the Washington Capitals, Jim Carrey or Carey Price. He certainly looks a lot more like Carey Price. What are they hearing, or what are they saying, I should say, in Canada?
Well, the comparisons to Carey Price are certainly out there. Just the robotic movements that Hart provides in the net, and just his reputation coming out of junior. It was well documented that numbers like that had not been displayed in the CHL since the days of Carey Price. And since Hart has been up, he's taken off. He's shown no signs of a Jim Carrey-esque player, and has tied Carey Price's record for 7 wins in a row by a goaltender younger than 21. Just this morning, Carter Hart was the first thing on SportsCenter on TSN, so I think he's getting recognition league-wide and even up here in Canada.
Yeah, so, Dan, I just wanted to, before we proceed, one of the biggest and best responses we've ever had to a show was our special last week, our interview one-on-one with myself and Kevin Woodley, the goalie guru, who's with NHL.com, who, by the way, covers the Vancouver Canucks and has his own website, ingoalmagazine.com. And Dan, it seems like so much of what Kevin talked about is relevant to what we've seen over the last little bit that Carter Hart's been here, and he's won 7 in a row. And before you pick that up, let's just give the fans an idea of what's going on here statistically. Now, I had this up before, and I've rebooted. So, yeah, Carter Hart is 10, 5, and 1, 2.48 goals against average, 925 save percentage. But as Kevin would tell you, you can't distill what he's doing to numbers. Well, what was your impression of the interview and how it reflects what we're seeing on the ice?
Yeah, I really like the interview. He obviously knows a lot about the technical side of goaltending. And, I was a goaltender growing up myself, and it's just interesting listening to somebody that puts that much time and effort into the position, and he knows all the technical abilities of what Carter Hart does and how he really broke it down. And I just thought it was interesting. I think that he knows that Carter Hart is very strong from a technical point. I think Dave Isaac said that, you're not going to see him make a whole lot of flashy saves because he doesn't get out of position too often, and he doesn't. I mean, he looks solid just about every single night. He's had a couple stinker goals here and there, but for the most part, this kid looks as legit as you can get.
Yeah, it's really exciting. The last time we saw somebody this dominant, he wasn't really. Well, I guess you could say Brian Boucher. Chef, you can help me on this one. Boucher came out of the gate with these streaks of being unbeatable, and it culminated in a really excellent performance in the 2000 playoffs. And then after that, we had Roman Cechmanek, who was kind of Hasek-like, but he was a bit of a head case. So really the best young
he would hit
prospect
everything with his head.
Yeah, he was, well, I'll tell you. His numbers really don't tell the whole story. He was terrific, but he was a tough guy in the locker room, obviously. But really you have to go back to Ron Hextall or Pelle Lindbergh since we had someone with that much pedigree giving this kind of performance.
Oh yeah, I mean you've been watching it even longer than me. I started watching, in the 80s. When it was what, Prism, I think it was, when you had to get Prism to get the Flyers. So, so I'm probably going back to then, and I'm saying you're definitely right. I mean, Hextall was probably the last premium goalie that we had that was of that next caliber, that higher level. So yeah.
Yeah. And the problem with Hextall is he hurt his groin and he had a contract holdout, or it was the other way around because he wasn't in shape. And he was never really the same goaltender after that. So it just goes to show you how fragile it can be, especially in Philadelphia. But Anthony, one thing that begs the question right now with the Flyers winning 8 in a row, it's like their chances of making the playoffs are still not very. There's all kinds of websites that figure out the percentages. I'm sure they've really drastically improved from even a week ago, but the Flyers are kind of in no man's land. They're probably not going to make the playoffs. They're pushing back their draft position. What's the priority if you're general manager Chuck Fletcher right now?
Well, if I'm Chuck Fletcher, I think the priority has to be setting the team up for next season. But at the same time, I remember doing this show with you guys, and we were saying, like, oh, yeah, they should finish inside the top 3, and, like, they should by no means miss the playoffs this year. And I think that if they can get in, this is a team that can compete. I think this is a playoff team, and I think it was just derailed by misguidance by the general manager, maybe rebelling against the coach, and just all that dysfunctionality in November when it all seemed to implode. So while I would say Chuck Fletcher has to make sure that next year is the priority when the team has a clean slate, it's kind of hard not to be tempted to try and push for the playoffs. You finally have a goaltender that is giving you like quality goaltending night in and night out and sustainability. And all the Flyers stars are starting to kind of play well. So I guess you have to play, you have to be ready for next season, but at the same time, it is really tempting to try and push for the playoffs this year.
Yeah. Bill Meltzer had a really good article right before the All-Star break about, tanking or just selling assets and telling the team, hey, listen, we're not going to make it. Let's just, we'll go out, we'll play, we'll try to win. If we don't, we're not really trying to win. Kind of an article about what it would be like if the Flyers finish very poorly. And he made a real good point, because for the Flyers to really do poorly would mean that Nolan Patrick, Konechny, Lindblom, and Hart wouldn't take the steps that we're seeing right now that are vital to the club's future, like Anthony's saying. And Dan, that brings to mind, like, what's the next step for Chuck Fletcher? Because we've seen this core, even though the kids have a real big share in what's been going on. Obviously, Carter Hart's the number one reason. Let's not kid ourselves. But, we've seen this core win 10 games, lose 10 games. Does this alter anything that Chuck Fletcher has to do vis-a-vis Simmons or any other moves he might make with free agents to be or what have you?
Personally, I wouldn't change anything. I would still go into this with the mindset that the core needs to be shaken up a little bit. I think there's still, guys like Simmons and Voracek are still responsible for the overall uneasiness that is on this roster right now. I think the kids need to continue to step up. Guys like Nolan Patrick and Lindblom have been very streaky, making it hard to kind of change the core and really go for a trade on Jake Voracek without making any real, waves in the lineup. But overall, I think moving forward, you still have to approach the situation that these kids are the future. This current core is expandable, and they need to work towards eventually integrating all the kids in the lineup. So 3-4 years down the road, they can have a really competitive team.
Yeah, I can see that. Just the way I look at it, Chef, just build your team. Okay, just improve your team. We know that Wayne Simmons is 16 goals this year, and he seemed to be a little bit better in the second half of the season, coming off all the injuries and the surgeries that can slow you down. But let's be honest, he's got like a Cy Young of 16 goals and 5 assists, and I don't want to see that player in 4, 5, 6 years. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense.
So I would say this, and nothing's really changed, and I agree with Dan. You still go forward And you just pray, like all season we'd see the ups and downs. No, now currently we're on an up, and it's an 8-game up, and it's and if you go back since Carter Hart's been up, they're starting to stabilize. The young players are starting to play more consistent. We're seeing a lot more from the second tier players like Lindbaum and Konecny. They're playing more regular, let's just say. And if they can hit their potential, it does. It makes those other players more expendable. But like Dan said, you don't change the plan just because you think you got something in your pocket right now. No, you don't. You plan for. This is like retirement. You're planning for your future here. You need to get this team better because you don't want to be in the same situation last year, like we were last year, this year, and in near future too.
Yeah, right. You don't want to get caught. Just like I said, yeah, I feel that we're in agreement. And just manage the team and make the best decisions. And if it works out this year, great. You're not sending a negative message like you're just dumping guys. But, when they made the Coburn trade, they got some value back, and it worked out. They traded a future and got something for now, and that's the way I would be looking at it. But, Anthony, something that's come up now that Carter Hart has seemingly established himself, one thing in my conversation with Kevin that I definitely believe in is the Flyers have to nail down somebody behind him going forward next year. And it can't be a guy like Anthony Stolarz because, Charlie O'Connor had an article about this and how important when you have these young goaltenders to have a good 1B behind him, because Anthony Stolarz has played 55 professional games of hockey since 2014. He's only played, I think, 15 or 17 NHL games in that time. He's missed significant parts of the last 3 seasons with an injury to the same knee. And after everything we went through this year, people sound like, oh, no, we can save all this money, like maybe $1 million or $2 million at the most per year over a veteran. I don't think anybody can move me off of that discussion. But what do you feel?
Well, I think the Flyers should get a solid 1B option. I think I've seen enough of this year with uncertainty in the net. Now, not to say that they went with 2 young guys. They went with the other side of the spectrum with 2 aging guys. But I think it's, as you mentioned, it's kind of like the best of both worlds. I look at a guy like Jimmy Howard. He seems like the ideal fit to be Hart's backup for next year. I know the Flyers have shown interest in Cam Talbot. I think that Howard would maybe insulate Hart a bit better, but Talbot may do the job as well. But as you mentioned, I don't think going with 2 goaltenders who have a combined less than 60 games of professional hockey experience or what have you combined, I don't think that's a recipe for success. The Flyers have been doomed by goaltending for a long time. Yeah, Hart's given them excellent goaltending, but I don't think they want to roll the dice on an iffy backup. We've seen how fast that they can go through the club's goaltending depth this year. I doubt they want to go down that road again next year.
No, I don't think so either. It's a shame for Anthony Stolarz. He could be a trade chip right towards the trade deadline if Elliott comes back. I'm not saying they should trade for somebody this year, wait till the offseason. That's fine, especially if Elliott is healthy. But, I don't think they're going to go after Howard because of the money he'll get. I think Howard might be attracted to other teams. We'll have to see. One thing I didn't know, Dan, is how close Carter Hart and Cam Talbot are in that they train in the offseason. They use the same goaltending coach. I think his name is Schultz in Edmonton. That could be a good fit for both on the ice and off the ice. And unlike maybe somebody like Jimmy Howard, he wouldn't command the net as much, knowing that Carter Hart's going to play about 55 games, or at least in that area.
Yeah, I think at this point, any little advantage you can give to Carter Hart, even if it's something as small as, picking a good backup for him, I think is going to work. I think Talbot could be reliable in a backup role. He's proven that he can hang at the NHL before. He's obviously not playing with a very good team right now in Edmonton, but I think it would be a good backup. I would not be opposed to him. I don't know. I'm more of a Stolarz fan than most people are, but, again, I don't think it's great to approach a season with two relatively young goaltenders, but I think Cam Talbot could be an interesting option.
Yeah. My issue with Stolarz is strictly the health. If you really want to go back down that road, I just don't get it. I referenced the O'Connor article earlier. He had a list of goaltenders who received 10 starts in their draft plus 3 seasons. And the 4 most recent were Vasilevsky, Tampa Bay, Holtby from Washington, Steve Mason in Columbus, and Carey Price. And 3 of those 4 had pretty viable 1B goaltenders, and 1 didn't. The one that didn't was Steve Mason. Now, of course, there's a lot of reasons that Steve Mason came out and didn't succeed until he got back here to Philadelphia. And his career never really did recover from what happened after that first year. And that Kevin Woodley and I talked about that on the interview. It had a lot to do with watching the player, but still there's a precedent there. And I like the fact that knowing Carter Hart, like any goaltender in the history of the league, is going to have downturns. And with the method that they're using, the positioning method that they're using, the best idea is to take him out if he's starting to get into bad habits. So if you have a run of games, you want him at 100% instead of just trying to keep playing him when he is not, up to snuff because you're worried about the backup. So that's another issue that comes up and something I think we should pay attention to. But, gentlemen, I think one thing that's really struck me is if you look at the list of victories, now, Chef, think about some of these teams. They beat Boston twice. They beat Montreal. These are conference final level teams. I was worried about it going into it. Winnipeg, the Rangers are the Rangers, like the Flyers, kind of like rebuilding but looking promising. And Edmonton, who was a fringe playoff team that, like Vancouver, the same thing. But there's some good victories in there that really and statistically, they did pretty well in those games.
Yeah, I mean, looking back, there's and more importantly than anything else, and I think a lot of Flyers fans will agree with this. I mean, they were fun games to watch. I mean, like if we're going back 2 months ago, even when they won, it wasn't even fun games. I mean, because you're looking at the same. We were talking about the same old players that, quite frankly, aren't there anymore, like Weiss and Laterra. And we're just happy to be getting to see what we all been bitching about and complaining about for the last 6 to 8 months is let the kids play. Let's see what we got. And we're seeing that these kids, they're relishing in their assignments. They're relishing in the fact that they got responsibility. One in particular that I'm really loving is Lindbaum. I mean, he is, I think, how many times did we see especially, I think it was the Vancouver and Edmonton game, where when they were killing penalties, it was save made by Hart, cleared by Lindbaum. I mean, I must have heard that. I was starting, I was like, because I was listening to 2 of them at work on the internet there, and I thought the thing skipped, and, as they sometimes do, but no, it wasn't. It's the same, they're playing to their potential, and it's so much more fun.
Yeah, Oscar's getting more responsibility, and I think a lot of it has to do with Gordon being installed as coach. I don't think there's any question the Flyers made a mistake when they fired Hextall. They just should have blew out Hextall. I guess that brings me to the next subject. Anthony, and you would have a good handle on this. It really looks like as good a plan as Hextall started out with, he kind of stalled and didn't know how to take this thing to another level. I don't know if he ever would have. And it's almost like the dam burst. You get Hextall out of here. He's like a whole lot of average. And Hextall just oh, I wasn't going to trade a young player for a 34 or 35-year-old. I wasn't going to do it. Like, nobody asked you to. I think I think Chuck Fletcher, at least when he sees guys that don't fit, like Weiss and Wheel, he says, you know what? This guy's not part of the solution going forward. So bye-bye, you know?
Yeah, well, there's no doubt when Hextall came in, I would give him the first 3 years, it was A+, or, he cleaned up the Homer mess as far as the cap goes. He drafted amazingly. But then it got to a point, and I would say kind of last season in 2017-18, where everyone was expecting the Flyers to push forward. And just in the fashion that they got bounced from the Penguins was kind of, I would say, rather embarrassing. And then it was like he was scared to take a step forward. In his press conference after he got fired, he said, I didn't think we were at go time. Well, when is go time? Because come this May, it would have been 5 years that he's there, and teams are passing you by. The Toronto Maple Leafs didn't take 5+ years to say it was go time. If he really did want to just completely scorch it and build it from the roots up, then it was he neglected the current core. If he thought it was going to take over 5 years, guys like Voracek, Simmons, even maybe Giroux should have been out of here a couple years ago, because you neglected the best years of Wayne Simmons. I would say he neglected the best years of Jakub Voracek. And now the Flyers are left with Simmons, who will probably get dealt. Voracek, maybe. His name has been out there here and there. But it was really disappointing that, like, once the initial phase of drafting and developing and clearing out some of the bad contracts had gone by, he was just content with the status quo. It seemed like Dave Haxtell was going to be coach for as long as Hextall was GM, and no matter how bad the Flyers did, he wouldn't do anything about it. Dave Scott was quoted in an article from Sam Donnellan a few weeks ago that Dave Scott said he didn't think Carter Hart would be here if Hextall was still in charge, and I tend to believe that just based on what he did in the last year and a half.
No, I saw that too, and it really just goes to show you what a difference coaching and management can make. And we had this back and forth a few weeks ago with Mike Sealski, who's a really fine columnist for Philly.com related to the Inquirer and Daily News, and he kept talking about how Hextall had a plan, and it was just mirroring the plan in Los Angeles. Well, that was back in 2012. That means that they started that plan sometime in 2007. And I'm like, and like Anthony just said, look what happened in Las Vegas when they had complete synergy. Yeah, they didn't have any big time players to worry about contract, but still, I mean, look at them now. Look what happened, like Anthony said, about Toronto. And what about Tampa Bay under Yzerman? Yzerman takes over. He's got what? He's got Hedman. He's got Stamkos. He's got Marty St. Louis, and the Cavier still okay, slow, but still productive. But within 5 years, they're in the Stanley Cup Finals. I mean, I don't know what people are looking at. And Dan, it just doesn't take you that long. And I don't think he ever would have pulled the trigger. I think it's like a guy who doesn't know how to swim. He's at the pool and he needs somebody to push him in.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. It was the things, when Fletcher came in and everybody was so worried, but really he hasn't done anything all that crazy yet. Carter Hart got called up because of goaltender injuries, but the goaltenders got hurt because Hextall failed to bring in any real goaltenders this past summer. And, he sent Dale Weiss down. He's given more ice time to Lindblom. He got rid of Hextall. He's just doing the things that should have been done the past year or two now. It's not like this guy's coming in and doing something revolutionary yet. Maybe he will. Maybe there's time for that. But right now, he's just making the moves. He's cleaning house of what Hextall failed to do for the past 2-3 years.
Yeah. I mean, Fletcher is Harvey Keitel in Point of No Return, which was the American remake of La Femme Nikita. I mean, it's what it is. He's a cleaner.
Well,
he was also the cleaner in couple in another movie. I thought you were going there for a second.
No, well, yeah, I might not have seen that movie, but I thought Fletcher had a really tough job. Carter Hart comes up. Now it's like the best job in the whole league. What happened? 8 games. Chef, go ahead. I don't know what else to say.
Yeah, I mean, like, in seriousness, all the armchair GMs that are in this, in our Twitter sphere that listen to us and talk back and forth will tell you the same thing that Dan just said. This is nothing revolutionary. We've all been saying, Fletcher's only doing what we've all been talking about that needed to get done for this team. It's a funny thing. I'm not going to give him too much credit yet. I mean, he hasn't done anything stupid yet. He's just done what's necessary. It's like when you're sick, you put a Band-Aid on it. When you're cooking dinner, you cut vegetables. These are things that you do. They're just normal part of the everyday routine that Hextall was stalling on and didn't want to deal with, and just wanted to keep as many eggs in his basket he could. And at some point, you need to break the eggs, you need to eat the eggs, and you need to throw away the eggs.
Well, I mean, it felt like Greek austerity measures or something. And that's when it's like suffer. You must suffer. It's like we watch a team. They were boring. The seats were empty, and it's like, look, we must stay disciplined. I get it. Yeah, like Kevin. Look, people who had the opinion that you have to build, and it was a bad idea to fire Hextall. When you've lost Kevin Allen, one of the premier national writers, who feels that the Flyers were justified in firing Ron Hextall because of not tending to what he had right in front of him, I think he said it all. Anthony, it sounds like you want to jump in with something.
Oh, yeah, well, because kind of echo your point about the armchair GMs, it was, as soon as Hextall was fired, they're just like, oh, here we go again. The Holmgren era is upon us. Watch him trade 80 first-round picks for Ilya Kovalchuk. And I'm just like, you know what? I was all for Holmgren coming out. The last 2 years or so were horrendous with him, but he took his shot. He got them to the Cup final. He wanted them to win. And bad contracts or not, bad farm system or not, those years when Homer was in charge, let's say from 2007 to 2013, those were fun years. They always had good teams. They missed 1 year of the playoffs that he was the GM for the full year. The first year he took over a month in for Clark. And under Hextall, that people weren't going. People stopped caring. I stopped caring at one point. Like, oh, okay, they're losing again, big deal. So for people that say that, we should have waited for Hextall's plan to come to fruition, well, how long are we supposed to wait?
Yeah, I mean, you're going to turn we're all going to turn into Methuselahs. I mean, we went from a glutton in Holmgren to an anorexic in Hextall. And it's like, we already had the bypass bariatric surgery. Let's eat a little bit. Dan, what's your final thoughts as we wrap up Hextall, and moving on?
Yeah, I think Anthony pretty much said it all. That the armchair GMs came out. Oh, now it's the Holmgren era again. And a lot of people were very worried about Chuck Fletcher coming in. You think about his tenure in Minnesota. The Suter and Parise and trading Brent Burns, and everybody immediately jumps to the negatives without even giving them a chance or remembering that there are positives. I'm fully behind Chuck Fletcher, and I think that he's going to make some moves at the trade deadline in this summer that should hopefully push his team forward, and we're going to try again next year and hopefully have a fresh new team on the ice that can come out with Carter Hart leading the way and really challenge for the playoffs next season.
Yeah, I agree. And just to qualify with Fletcher, I'm not going to make excuses for him, but if you recall, and Anthony, you can back me up on this if I say anything wrong. Craig Leopold used to be the owner of Nashville, and that situation really turned bad financially. So he got out of that situation, came to Minnesota. It was more cash rich. There was a better market at that time, and he just wanted to go for it. So he had a lot of say in, like Ed Snyder would back in the day, in pushing Chuck Fletcher to go for Suter and Parise. And within that framework, that's what Chuck Fletcher had to work with.
Well, yeah, like people always say like, oh yeah, like look at him, shelling out big contracts. You know what? Like you said, the ownership wanted him to sign Parise and Suter. They're both from Minnesota, and before then, the Wild did not have a cornerstone D, and they got Suter, and they gave him what cornerstone Ds get paid. Same for Parise. They didn't have a superstar forward. They got Parise, and they paid him what a superstar would get. And you know what? Since Minnesota has got those two players, they've been a relevant hockey team. Have they challenged for the cup? A few years they're up there. Obviously, they haven't gone necessarily deep, but it brought them back to relevancy. I believe they've been in the playoffs every year since Fletcher made those deals. So those were, maybe besides a couple of years on term, those were good deals for Minnesota, who were pretty lost in obscurity before then. So yeah, I agree with you. I think just like piling it on Fletcher for those deals in Minnesota is just ignorance and not doing your due diligence.
No, I agree. I mean, he obviously made mistakes with the Martin Hansel deal and some other things, but he's acknowledged that. I'm hoping that he's learned. There have been a lot of executives and coaches who came out of the gate. It didn't work out. They got a second or third chance, and they ended up cup winners. And hopefully Chuck Fletcher will be another one. Gentlemen, as we move on, Chef, the Flyers became the second fastest NHL team to 2,000 wins. They're the first non-original six franchise to hit that mark. That's a big deal. The Habs were the fastest, but the Flyers got there quicker than all of the other original five franchises by at least 187 games played. And you know what? It's almost like we forget in this middling era of latter-day Holmgren and Hextall that the Flyers have been fun for a long time. And yeah, they haven't won a cup since 75, but they also went to five other finals? They won in 76, 80, 85, 87, and 97 and 2010. Yeah, so six other finals and have consistently been a playoff team. So I think that since 75 thing is just like a lazy out.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, you get a lot of people that will sit there and bash this organization sometimes about saying that they don't want to win. Well, we all know that's a bunch of malarkey now. It's not true. It's hashtag not true. It is one of those, this team has always been committed to winning. Now, whether it's been the best process, like we said over the years, meddling GMs and owners, they will do stuff and they will do it. But like Anthony said, in the best interest of the team, all the stories you hear about Snyder meddling with, I think it was the Brizgalov thing where that deal was done before he even walked in the door, apparently, all the stuff like that. But guess what? That was done because the guy cared and he wanted to win. And it showed over the years. And now it's mathematically proven that this team, they want to win. They still want to win. If they win, it'll be huge. It'll be a huge celebration in the city.
Yeah, there's no question. I think the Flyers are positioned to move up a notch depending on what happens. I think the Eagles won their Super Bowl. Okay, and I think people are very forgiving this year. The process, I don't know, with the Sixers, maybe that's stalled a little bit. I can't tell you. They need another piece. The Phillies are waiting for Manny Machado or Bryce Harper to do something. Can you imagine what a heart attack it's going to be if the Phillies get neither one of those guys? But
yes,
the Flyers are in a position. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, remember, of all the things that happened, when the Phillies won, we were, in recent memory, the Phillies won. And then, you can go back even 20 years to the Sixers won when they won. And now the Eagles won. Remember, it was the Flyers who started the iconic celebrations around the city at all the major spots, like at Cottman and the Boulevard, where we grew up near. It started with the Flyers. The Flyers were the ones that brought the first big championship to the city, and I think it would erupt even more if it happened again.
Yeah, I'd like to think that. I mean, when the three of you guys weren't even zygotes, yes, I am that old. The Flyers won their cup And it was a different era. The Sixers had won in 67. I was 7 back then, so you do the math. And Wilt Chamberlain was supposed to be, if I understand correctly, a part owner of the team going forward. Well, that broke down. He got traded to Los Angeles in a huff. And it was like the Phillies were nothing. All this team stunk. And then the Flyers woke up after the Flett-Lonsbury trade in 72, 73. And you knew you had something special. And, of course, they cashed in on it. That first parade took everybody by surprise. They had 2 million people estimated, of course. I went to the one in 75. And it's something I'll never forget. And it became the standard. So the Flyers became the standard bearers of excellence for Philadelphia sports, like Chef said, starting in 1974. And I can't wait to see if they can reclaim that. And it started back then with the reemergence and the return of Bernie Perrant after being schooled by Jacques Plante in Toronto. And Anthony, you probably heard the story when Bernie came back, that was exactly what they needed. And he was the difference. And we're hoping that Carter Hart can be that guy.
Yeah, well, and obviously I don't live in Philadelphia, so I wouldn't know about all those celebrations and all that. But I know in Montreal they're starved for a victory, and it's only been 25 years since they won. But yeah, I think that Hart has breathed new life into the Philadelphia fan base because he finally kind of shows that light at the end of the tunnel. And I think it makes it that much better because there's been all this hype surrounding him since he got drafted in 2016. And I don't know, I think that there was always this bit of lingering because of the dark cloud looming over the Flyers net, like, oh my God, like this guy's going to have all this hype and then he's going to flop. But I think it's so much more rewarding that there was all this hype and he's been even better than advertised.
Yeah, there is no question that particular aspect of it, that phenomenon is, I think it spikes it. It adds to the excitement. And in our conversation last week with Kevin Woodley, and again, if you haven't heard it, we can talk about it all day. I promise you will enjoy it. It's probably the best thing we've ever done. And nobody is more connected with goaltending and what's going on today and where it's going in the future than Kevin Woodley. Check it out on all of our podcast platforms. The response has been amazing. Kevin talked about these flash in the pans in like Steve Mason, and he talked about the Hamburglar, Andrew Hammond. And the difference is Carter Hart is doing something that is sustainable because he's staying within himself, his system, his positioning, and his mindset with his coach, John Stevenson, I think his name is. This really bodes well for the future because he's doing something that's reproducible, Dan, and that is really exciting. It's not like he's not getting into that posture of what they call desperation, which is hockey technicalese for not playing your system and just relying on your athletic ability.
Yeah, and I think that's what makes Carter Hart so interesting. He's a complete player. I mean, on the ice, his technical ability on the ice is fantastic. I can't really remember another time where I watched a goaltender be as consistently good in terms of being in position as him. I ranted about this on one of my other shows a couple weeks ago. Everybody raved about Alex Lyon when he got called up last year, and I absolutely hated the guy because he was flopping around like a fish. He did not look like he belonged. And Carter Hart comes up and he's so solid. And the fact that he's solid on the ice, and it seems like his off-ice regimen is just as solid, I think he's going to be a top star for years to come.
Yeah, I ain't lying, fellas. Alex stinks. No, but
well, one of the things I want to point out from the interview is that it was pretty much confirming like what you hear. It's nice to hear an outside source who doesn't have this biased opinion about, because we obviously love the kid. I've spoken to him twice when we're going down to the games for PSN, and and he just carries himself. The kid is he's so relaxed. He's so at ease. He's so comfortable with the game and who he is in the game that you sometimes forget he's only 20 years old. But like with his positioning and how he tracks the puck, we always hear about it from us and the local people that he always see. The reason why he wouldn't flop around like a fish is because he had better positioning. He tracked the puck better, all that stuff that Dan was just talking about too. But it was just wonderful to hear confirmation from somebody else that it wasn't us just trying to project that we want him to be this good, that he is going to be the legit thing.
Yeah, we hope so. And, you think about next year, and I don't mean to knock Alex Lyon. He's trying the best he can, but Dan's right. I mean, Alex Lyon is a guy who can't control his net. He's not a real talented guy. And I think next year in Lehigh Valley, you're going to definitely have Felix Sandstrom. You might have Kirill Ustimenko, who's having a great year in is it the MHL? Is that the one that's like
MHL.
That's like the CHL.
It is the MHL.
In Russia. So, I mean, there's not going to be any room for Alex Lyon. He could be a trade chip or they could just let him walk. But, I didn't want to get too fixated on Carter Hart tonight, but here we got two segments with him because we have Anthony here and who's going to just give us a rundown of what's going on in a hot stove. We're approaching the trade deadline on the 25th. And the Flyers are going to be active likely if they don't sign Wayne Simmons, which I don't recommend, which we talked about earlier. And I guess the big news, we just want to mention it briefly, is that Austin Matthews signs a shorter deal than some people thought he would with the Toronto Maple Leafs.
Well, basically what happened there was that if this is a deal that the less term is beneficial for Matthews because he took less money than he could have gotten. If Matthews were to have got signed for the max 8-year term, Toronto would have had to fork out, I believe the number was 13.8, which is the same percentage of the cap as McDavid signed for. Now, with the rising salary cap each and every year, it's going to, with inflation and whatnot, eventually Matthews and McDavid, for that matter, will be underpaid. So this will walk Matthews into UFA. They're going to eat 2 years off of his UFA status. But then by the time he's 26 or 27, once this deal expires, then he'll be able to sign that long-term deal that will take him into his early to mid-30s. And in the meantime, it saves much-needed cap space for Toronto. So I think it's a win-win for both sides.
Yeah, I can see that. I think people might not want to talk about it too much, but I think it would not be surprising if Toronto had some concerns about the way his shoulders popped in and out a few times. Give that about 5 years to see if he can, maybe resolve that issue or make sure it doesn't come back. When you invest that kind of money in somebody, you don't want to get stuck with a guy who has a chronic shoulder problem, although not too many people are going to be talking about that, I'm sure.
Yeah, well, exactly. I think it's a win for both sides. I think that in an ideal world, the Leafs would have liked to lock up Matthews for an additional 3 years at the cap number of 11.6. But obviously Matthews was not going to do that to himself. He knows what he's worth. He knows that if he walked to UFA in 5 years from now, he could get probably at that time $15 million. Or even now, for that matter, I'm sure someone would be willing to give him that. So I think for the Leafs, you do have a chance to see if he will get healthy. But I think the 5-year term was mostly to give them short-term salary relief so that they can get a guy like Mitch Marner signed, even though I think that's going to be difficult even with this saved cap figure. But smaller guys like Casper Kapanen, Andreas Janssen, etc. They're already going to probably lose Jake Gardiner in the offseason due to cap reasons. So any dollar that they could save on the Matthews deal was a win for Kyle Dubas and the Leafs.
Yeah, if there's any question, I think I tweeted at something that if the cap is $83 million, it was Matt Larkin from THN. If the cap is $83 million, the Leafs will have 11,000 11,000. 11,094,000 and change. Yeah, 11,000. With just 14 guys under contract and RFAs, Marner, Kapanen, Janssen to sign. That'll be interesting to see if Dubas breaks his promise to William Nylander. They're going for it this year, and I think they're going to go through a lot of changes next year. Maybe try to shed some of those deals and break some of those promises. Maybe. Chef, let me ask you: pick two players that you think will not be here that are currently on the Flyers roster of significance. Not Phil Varone, but for sure. Yeah, anybody can say Phil Varone. Okay, all right, you got your one. Yeah, but of real consequence, like Anna Simmons, Raffle.
I would say Simmons. I don't think they're gonna. I would probably say Simmons, Raffle, Stolarz. I can give you three right off the top of my head if I thought about it a little more.
No, I'm talking about after the 25th. I'm talking about after this year.
Oh, after I thought you meant this season. I still think Raffle would be good for somebody that's looking for a fourth liner. I think he's gone. I think Simmer's gone too. I think Simmer and Raffle. If you have to press me on it, I think they're both gone.
Okay. Dan,
I don't think you're going to be able to get rid of Jake.
No, probably in season unless they make a pure hockey trade, which I'm okay with. I've seen some people making plans about the Flyers being a cup contender. I don't think a cup contender is going to have Jake Voracek on that team, but and I don't. I think if they have been fundamentally broken with guys like that on the team. It's time to move on. And 8 victories. Well, they lost 10 in a row last year. They won 10 in a row before that. Dan, just don't play games with this core with me. Just build the best team possible. And I don't think Voracek is part of that going forward. What do you think?
Yeah, I really don't like Jake Voracek. I brought it up this past summer, and people automatically, people love analytics in hockey until there's somebody they don't agree with. And Jake Voracek is really one of those guys, his turnover numbers are terrible, but, Daniel, he has 50 assists. He needs to be here. I think he's more of a negative than a positive at this point. I just don't see a reason why he's here. I think he's going to be hard to get rid of. He has 8.25 a season for another 5 years. So it is going to be hard, but if they find a player like a team like St. Louis who has players like Tarasenko, or Dallas who has, the Benz and the Sagans who you can, work out big trades with reasonable cap hits, similar cap hits, then I think there is an option to move Jake Voracek there.
I do too. I think it's something that they're going to do. We've mentioned on previous shows that in the previous 5 seasons, Jake Voracek has increasingly given up more shots against, which is a testament to his defense or his lack of. I don't know how he's running. I haven't checked it recently. But if he's tracking better, I think he's tracking toward about 70 points right now. Hey, that's great. That means he can hold his value. I mean, at this point, Voracek is 12 goals and 45 points. I'm not really looking so much at the minus 12 and things like that. But if you go with the Corsi and things like that, I think he's going to end up looking a lot better. I'm checking that right now as we speak. And of course, I went right by it. Also, how many times I don't know all, and I don't even know if there's a stat to look at this. How many times did he directly result in the goal at a bad pass to the blue line? And I do believe 2 of them last year and this year were direct results in a loss in a game, in overtime or something like that. So I look at it like this. Yeah, he might get you 70 points, but how many, at what cost? You're giving away how many games could you win with somebody not giving up so many turnovers? That's a hard thing. That's something you have to make a mental note of. I mean, if you look at the shots, like of course he's above 50 relative to other teammates. He's like 10th out of all the guys that have played a reasonable number of games, which he should be better at. So again, the stats, the underlying stats kind of match goal metrics in this particular case, which is not really a shock. I think it's an imperative that they get a value for him. And Anthony, we want to go back to you and want to know what you're hearing on the Flyers trade front. Obviously, you're with the fourthperiod.com yourself, Dave Pagnotta and Dennis Bernstein. Have a great show on the weekends. We love listening to on Sirius XM NHL. What are you hearing with regard to the Flyers?
Well, it's no secret Fletcher will be active. We just put a story up as we came on the air in which we cited Pierre LeBrun, where he was quoted in saying, you'll check this on our site if you want, more likely than not, they will still trade Wayne Simmons if and when someone pays up with the right offer. And he lists the Flames, the Lightning, the Golden Knights, the Bruins, and the Predators as all teams that are interested. So I think Fletcher wants to be a buyer and a seller, more so a seller to get rid of maybe Wayne Simmons, perhaps Michael Raffl. And I know Radko Gudas's name has been has drawn some interest because he's actually had a tremendous year. But I think that Fletcher's going to be one of the most active GMs. And I don't think it's just going to be seller moves like we've seen from Ron Hextall the past 4 or 5 years. I think he's going to make moves that also make the team better now. I think the Flyers have more than enough prospects and draft picks to, look to acquire someone who could help them right now.
Yeah, I think they do. And that's the last topic of the night before we go. Chuck Fletcher had a press conference last week, and he said more or less what Anthony's saying is that he's had a chance to look at the team for 2 months and evaluate them. And he's going to be a buyer and a seller, a lot like we've been talking about. Just make your team better. You're not going to have a fire sale to tank. That's ridiculous. We've already dismissed that, and especially now that you won 8 in a row. But he's also not going to have this irrational exuberance about a win streak with a team that's known for this up and down play. And Chef, just any comments you have about some things you were encouraged, discouraged, what your feedback about some of the things that Chuck Fletcher had to say last week?
I was encouraged. It means he's going to make a move, which is pretty much what we all think is, exactly probably going to be Simmons. There's reports of it everywhere, or whatever. We know he's going to do something. It's just not going to be another like the last 3-4 trade deadlines when nothing happened, nothing of consequence. Like the team's not going to get better. It's not going to get worse. It's going to stay the same. I don't believe that's the case this time. I don't know if there'll be huge blockbuster moves, but I know that, something will be done. And at this point, I'm glad about that. If I have to see somebody like Wayne Simmons go, I hate to see him go, but also if it's for the better of the team and we get something of consequence back for it, I'm very happy.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. He's not going to trade his first-round pick. I don't anticipate that, certainly not for a rental. And I think if you read what he said, there's always opportunities for me. It's not the time before the trade deadline or even the rest of the year. From this point forward, we have to get better. To be better next year, we may have to try to get better this year. That's what we're trying to do. Whether it's coaches on the ice or adding players, whatever we have to do. I could see us buying and selling, I guess, to use those terms. But the bigger focus is we'd like to get some pieces in here that will be part of this for a few years. That's really where my focus has been. Improve the team. I think we have the right guy at the right time. I hope it ends up that we're prophetic and that we're not pathetic. But Anthony, before we go, is there anything league-wide that is imminent? There's something people would want to know that maybe you're just getting a late breaker on in terms of some players that could be in play?
Well, I think a lot of people have their eyes on the situation that's going on in Ottawa. Matt Duchene and Mark Stone are impending unrestricted free agents, and the Senators want to know if they're going to re-sign or not. And they have up until the deadline to figure it out, because the Senators are not going to let Mark Stone, arguably one of the best wingers in the NHL, and Matt Duchene, who they gave up a king's ransom, including this year's first-round pick for, walk out the door for nothing. So I think keeping a close eye on that over the next coming weeks is going to be something to do. And I also believe to look on what's going on in Edmonton. I think Edmonton wants to get into the playoffs. I think that moves will be made. Maybe not as much now that Pete Chiarelli is gone and he's no longer trying to save his job. But as far as Canadian markets, I really do expect more so Ottawa than Edmonton, because Edmonton made the management switch. But I think those two teams are two to keep an eye on.
Okay. Let me ask you, I hear a lot about Cody Ceci, and he's an analytics nightmare, and I watch him. I don't see anything special. I think a better defenseman, a right-handed guy, and we just mentioned earlier, Radko Gudas has 1 year left. I think he's $3.35 million, and he'll never have a higher value than he has right now as a trade chip. Thinking the Flyers have Phil Myers on the way, they're completely committed to getting a top four guy who's currently not on the team in a trade or UFA, what have you. With Pietrangelo, Parayko, they're going to go after Carlson, something. So you throw that into the mix. Yeah, Sam Moran. I know Dan's happy, and we're going to see him at some point.
Yes.
But you put that all together, and have you heard anything about interest in him or the Flyers' willingness to listen?
Well, I know for a fact that he is garnering interest, and he's something that the Leafs are looking for, like in the flesh. Babcock loved Roman Polak over the last few years, and Radko Gudas is basically a better version of Roman Polak. Now, the problem with that is the Leafs just swung a deal to acquire Jake Muzzin, and they gave up their first-round pick, one of their top prospects, and the rights to another prospect. If the Flyers are going to move him, I think they're not just going to dump him for a mid-round pick. No. I don't know if the Leafs necessarily have the assets now to pay up for a guy like Gudas. When they acquired Muzzin, it effectively took them out of the Simmons conversation because of the assets that they gave up and they no longer have. I think teams are going to come lurking around for Gudas because he does have cost certainty beyond this year, but I don't think that Fletcher is just going to settle for anything. If a team isn't willing to give a significant return, I think the Flyers just hang on to him and, if anything, trade him in the offseason.
Yeah. Although this trade deadline, I'm also looking at maybe Nashville and maybe Tampa Bay. Nashville, I don't know if they're going to keep PK Subban. They're going to have Dante Fabro in there. They might want to set themselves up with depth as they break Fabro into the rotation. And maybe Tampa, they know who he is. They know he's not making a lot of money. That might be a depth move for them. But other than that, I'm not really sure where else he would go.
Yeah, well, I think with Tampa, if I had to take a bet, they're the front runners for Wayne Simmons, because I think plain and simple, they could outbid anyone in terms of how many assets they have. They have seemingly a never-ending wave of blue-chip prospects that come in. So I think if they want Gudas now, they can. And it would make sense because they're going to lose Dan Girardi in free agency. They're going to lose Anton Stralman in free agency. Both those guys are right shots. So I could see a fit there. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
speaking of Tampa, 3 names to keep in mind if we're not dealing with roster players. And I hope I don't butcher these, but Cal Foot is a defenseman. He could be interesting. Somebody the Flyers would be interested in. Taylor Radish, I think was a former line mate of Morgan Frost. Correct me if I'm wrong. And Boris Kachuk.
Yeah.
These are 3 names that might interest the Flyers. So you didn't hear it here first, but at least you heard it. But anyway, but with that, we're going to close up. We're going to get some final announcements here. Just first for us, we're going to have a live event at Steam Pub in Southampton, Pennsylvania. That's right. You had a big confab at Xfinity Live this past weekend. I thought it went pretty well. We're going to do our version of that on Sunday, February the 24th. We'll give you more details as they are available. But in the interim, Chef, you got to tell us where Steam Pub is at and what people are going to want to know.
Yeah, so we're at located at 606 2nd Street Pike, Southampton, PA. Easily accessible. We're right near the intersection of Street Road and 2nd Street Pike. Very easy to get through. And, hey, we're up for the Bucks happening list for several categories and stuff like that. And actually for Chef, too. So if you've been there, anybody listening to us, I know there's a couple of you. If you've been there and you feel that we deserve it, we would love to have your vote. So thanks.
Yeah, just go to our Twitter account. I retweeted that information at O&B Puck, at O&B Puck, our Twitter account, and you'll see a retweet of the Steam Pub information, and or go to Chef's. Chef, what is your account? At Chef to the B to the left, or
Chef to the left B.
Okay, cool. Dan, the busiest podcaster in town. He's got a doubleheader tonight. Tell us about your podcast schedule and all the famous people you're interacting with now.
That's right. I double booked myself tonight. Right after this show, I'm doing an episode of Brotherly Pod with Carey. I'm sure everybody knows him on Flyers Twitter. That'll take place soon after this show ends. You can find me at Dan the Flyer Fan. You can find the site at Brotherly Puck, at Brotherly_Pod. If you're interested in Carter Hart notes and counting down his wins till he passes Martin Brodeur, you can do that at Hart Countdown. And I'm a busy man these days.
Yeah. Anthony, I know you got it lit, so let's just get your information real fast so we can get you out of here.
Oh, well, you can find me on thefourthperiod.com. I usually write stuff up weekly. My Twitter is at @DiMarco25, or you can follow the website on Twitter, The Fourth Period, at TFP.
Terrific. Thanks for coming on and doing this. We'll definitely be talking to you real soon with your trade activity.
Thanks a lot, guys. I love coming on, and enjoy your evening.
All right, you too. Take care. And with that, we're just going to remind you the O&B Puckcast is on 5 podcast platforms. And if you could rate and subscribe our show, particularly on iTunes, it really helps the show. Give us a review. Just a big shout out to No Knees Mead, who gave us a 5-star review, and really do appreciate it. And it helps the show. We have some other announcements and things breaking. They're not official yet, so I don't want to just let the cat out of the bag. It's good stuff, So we're also on SoundCloud, Stitcher, TuneIn Radio, Google Play, and So if you could help us out with that, we'd really appreciate it. And with that, we're going to call it to a close. We'll probably be back, I think, Monday the 18th of this month, right after that back-to-back with Detroit. And so until then, let's go Flyers, and everybody take care.